My ex cheated while I was in the army, so I left her. Now I'm raising her child, and my late wife's secret affair unraveled everything. My ex-girlfriend cheated on me while I was in the army. When I returned and found out, I left her and married another woman. But later I found out that she had a child, and it was mine. Some friends of ours, Max and Jenny, came over to visit us. We've known them for years, since right after we got married. Jenny used to work with my wife Emily at a large international travel agency, and Max supervises a production line at a manufacturing plant. I work as an electrician for a local company, so we're all pretty blue-collar folks. It was supposed to be a fun, casual evening. We decided to watch a movie called One More Year, a romantic drama about two people who meet once a year for decades despite being married to other people. The movie is known for its bittersweet love story, but I didn't expect the reactions it would stir. As the lovers in the movie parted ways at the end, both Emily and Jenny had tears in their eyes. I found myself feeling irritated. I can't believe you're getting emotional over this. They're cheating. How is this romantic? I scoffed, unable to hide my annoyance. Jenny, who had been sniffling, immediately jumped to defend the characters. But they're in love. It's not about the cheating. It's about the connection they have. Sometimes love doesn't fit into the usual rules. Emily, perhaps emboldened by Jenny's defense, turned to me with an edge in her voice. It's about genuine love, Matt, not some petty affair. You wouldn't understand. Her words cut deeper than I expected, especially because they reminded me of past arguments we had about my own history. Before I could even react, Max raised his hands in the air, signaling for a break. Hey, let's not start a fight over a movie. It's just a story, man. Let's not get all worked up. But I wasn't done yet. Okay, Max, let's flip this around. What if Jenny told you she wanted to meet someone else, once a year, and you just had to be cool with it? Max chuckled, shaking his head. I know Jenny. She wouldn't do that. I trust her. A tense silence settled over the room. Jenny shifted on Max's lap, leaning into him affectionately, while Emily sat back on the couch, her posture stiff. She offered to get us all drinks, clearly trying to change the mood. I took the opportunity to take a deep breath and settle my nerves. We ended up switching off the movie and moving into the kitchen for a card game. But my mind wasn't on the game. I was lost in my thoughts, reflecting on my past, wondering how things had gotten to this point. I couldn't help but think back to high school. I had been head over heels in love with my high school sweetheart Karen. We had planned out our whole future together. But right before I left for military service, Karen went to a dance with another guy, Jake. I remember feeling uneasy about it, but I tried to shake it off. For months into my deployment, I received a letter from my sister, letting me know that Karen was pregnant. The worst part? Karen hadn't even told me herself. Fuming with betrayal, I wrote her a scathing letter, ending our relationship without even letting her explain. That was the last time we spoke. She married Jake shortly afterward, and they moved overseas, starting a family together. I buried my feelings, threw myself into my duties, and tried to forget. But I never really did. When I came back from my tour, people treated me like a hero. I got a few commendations for bravery, and my family and friends threw a big welcome home party for me. It was supposed to be a time to celebrate, but I couldn't help but feel disconnected. There were so many familiar faces, but none of them were Karen's. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling of loss, despite everyone's congratulations and smiles. During the party, I found myself gravitating toward Emily. She had been a classmate of mine, though we hadn't been particularly close back in school. She had been dating Zach, the star athlete, but that relationship had recently ended. Emily was now pursuing a business degree at the local college, and working part-time at the travel agency where she would eventually meet Jenny. We started talking, mostly small talk at first, but there was something in the way we both seemed to understand each other's heartache. One thing led to another, and within 6 months, Emily and I were living together. We got married not long after that, and for a while, things seemed to be moving in the right direction. I was working at a nearby factory, and I had started my electrician training. Life was good, or at least it felt that way. We had mutual respect for each other, shared interests, and our physical connection was strong. Emily was fun, adventurous, and we enjoyed spending time together. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering, did she ever think about Zach? And, to be honest, I sometimes still thought about Karen. It wasn't that I didn't love Emily, because I did, but there was a part of me that hadn't fully let go of my past. I suppose we all carry our ghosts. One day, Emily mentioned that her company was hosting a big convention, and spouses were invited to come along. I wasn't really interested, and I was busy with work, so I told her to go without me. Jenny ended up going with her instead, since Max couldn't make it either. They had a great time, apparently, though I was just mostly glad they enjoyed themselves. When Emily came back, we ended up having a passionate night together, and a few months later, we found out she was pregnant. Our first daughter, Lily, was born on Valentine's Day, and she became the light of our lives. Emily took some time off from work, and my sister, Lauren, helped out with childcare. It seemed like everything was falling into place, but there were still cracks in our relationship that we didn't address. We argued, sometimes about little things, sometimes about bigger things like our pasts. I tried not to dwell on it too much, but there were moments when I wondered if we were really happy, or just going through the motions. Emily went back to work after a few months, and life returned to its usual rhythm. She continued to attend conventions for her job, sometimes with Jenny, and sometimes with other co-workers. I stayed home with the kids when she was away. After a while, though, it felt like we were living parallel lives. She had her world, with her work and her friends, and I had mine. We loved each other, sure, but we weren't as connected as we once were. Then, after one of her trips, Emily came home and announced that she was pregnant again. Our second daughter, Ava, was born, and our family grew. But with 2 young kids, the pressures of work, and the routine of daily life, Emily and I grew even further apart. We stopped having the deep conversations we once had, and our time together felt more like a duty than something we truly enjoyed. I noticed it, and I'm sure she did too, but neither of us knew how to fix it. We seemed like the perfect couple to everyone else: 2 kids, a house, decent jobs, and a stable life. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. We argued more, often about petty things, and I found myself wondering if we would have stayed together if it weren't for the kids. One day, after a particularly heated argument, I suggested that I join her on her next work trip. Maybe we could use the time to reconnect. But Emily brushed it off, saying that it wouldn't be fun for me, and I didn't push the issue. I could tell she wasn't interested, and that hurt more than I cared to admit. A few weeks later, Max invited me on a fishing trip to Canada. It was supposed to be a guy's getaway, and I almost said no, but Emily surprised me by encouraging me to go. "It'll be good for you to take a break," she said. "You've been working so hard, and it's been ages since you had a real vacation." So I went, and to be honest, it was exactly what I needed. The trip was relaxing, and it gave me time to clear my head. When I got back, things with Emily were good for a while. We were closer, more intimate, and it felt like maybe we were getting back on track. Shortly after, she found out she was pregnant with our 3rd child, a son we named Noah. After Noah was born, I decided to get a vasectomy. 3 kids felt like more than enough, and Emily didn't seem to mind. Life was busy but manageable, and we did our best to make it work. But deep down, I knew we were still struggling. Then, one day, my sister Lauren dropped the bombshell. She told me that Karen, my high school sweetheart, had been asking about me. Apparently, Karen's daughter Grace was sick and needed a liver transplant, and Karen believed I might be Grace's biological father. My head spun as I tried to process this. Karen hadn't told me she was pregnant when we broke up, and now, after all these years, she wanted my help. Despite everything, I couldn't turn my back on Karen or Grace. I agreed to undergo testing to see if I was a match. When I told Emily about this, she was livid. She accused me of caring more about Karen and her daughter than our own family. It was a mess. But I couldn't ignore the fact that Grace might be my child, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to help her. After the tests came back, it was confirmed. I was Grace's biological father. I didn't know what to do with that information. My emotions were all over the place. On one hand, I felt responsible for Grace and wanted to do whatever I could to help her. On the other hand, I knew this revelation could destroy my marriage. Emily was furious, and things between us went from bad to worse. We barely spoke, and when we did, it usually ended in an argument. I knew she was hurt, and I tried to understand her perspective, but I couldn't abandon Grace. I went through with the surgery to donate part of my liver, and thankfully, Grace's body accepted it. She began to recover, and Karen and I kept things civil for the sake of Grace. But my relationship with Emily was hanging by a thread. Then, the unthinkable happened. Emily and Zach were killed in a car accident while attending a work convention together. It turned out that they had been carrying on an affair during those trips, something I had suspected but never confirmed until now. The news of Emily and Zach's deaths hit me like a freight train. Even though my marriage to Emily had been strained, I never expected something so tragic to happen. One moment, I was furious with her for the affair she had kept hidden, and the next, she was gone. Along with her, the man she had rekindled her relationship with, Zach, her high school boyfriend. It was like fate had come full circle in the worst way possible. The accident occurred as they were driving back from dinner after one of those work conventions. The details were murky, but the official report said their car had spun out of control and collided with a tree. Both died instantly. I had to figure out how to break the news to our children, Lily, Ava, and Noah. How do you explain to kids that their mother is never coming home again? That's a conversation no parent should ever have to face. But I had no choice. I called my sister Lauren, who came over immediately to help me break the news. We sat the kids down in the living room. I'll never forget the looks on their faces as I told them their mom had passed away. Lily, who was 7, seemed to understand immediately. Her face crumpled in on itself as she burst into tears, and Ava, who was only 5, followed suit without fully comprehending what was happening. Little Noah, barely 2, looked around confused, sensing the sadness but not yet able to grasp the weight of it all. "I'm so sorry," I said, feeling the tears prick my own eyes. "Mommy loved you all so much, and she always will. She's not here anymore, but we have each other, okay? We're going to be all right." I hugged them close as they cried, and I felt the overwhelming pressure of being a single parent press down on me, heavier than anything I had ever known. Emily was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces alone. In the days following the accident, I had to deal with the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, and the constant barrage of phone calls from relatives, friends, and even some reporters who had caught wind of the scandal surrounding Emily and Zach's deaths. I wasn't interested in talking to anyone about the affair, but people have a way of sniffing out gossip, and once it starts, it's hard to stop. Emily's parents were devastated, of course. They hadn't known about her affair, and it broke my heart to see their grief compounded by the revelation that their daughter hadn't been faithful to me. I didn't want to add to their pain, but the truth was already out there. The affair had been exposed, and people were talking. It was all over town. At the funeral, I stood beside my children, feeling like I was floating above my body. The service was quiet, somber, and filled with people who didn't know the whole story, people who had no idea that my marriage had been on the verge of collapse long before the accident. They offered their condolences, but their words felt hollow, as if they were trying to soothe a wound that was too deep to heal with simple platitudes. Zach's wife, Lauren, attended the funeral as well, standing at a distance, her face a mask of controlled grief. She hadn't known about the affair either, at least not until the accident. We had spoken briefly over the phone after the accident, and while we didn't exchange many words, there was an unspoken understanding between us. Both of our spouses had betrayed us, and now they were both gone. It was a strange, surreal feeling, knowing that the people we had loved and trusted had been leading double lives. After the funeral, I felt drained, emotionally and physically. I was left to raise 3 children on my own, and I had no idea how I was going to manage it. My job as an electrician required long hours, and I had relied on Emily to take care of the kids while I worked. Now, that safety net was gone. Thankfully, my sister Lauren stepped in to help. She offered to move in temporarily to assist with the kids while I figured out a more permanent solution. Her presence was a relief, but it didn't take away the sting of losing Emily, or the bitterness I felt knowing about her affair with Zach. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work, trying to stay busy and distracted. But no matter how hard I worked, there was always that lingering emptiness when I came home at night. The house felt too quiet, too empty without Emily there, even with the kids running around. One day, about a month after the funeral, I got an unexpected phone call. It was Karen, my high school sweetheart and the mother of Grace. The child I had recently learned was mine. "Matt," she said softly, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I just heard about Emily." Her voice stirred up memories, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. After everything that had happened with Emily, I wasn't sure I had the emotional capacity to deal with Karen too. "Thanks," I finally replied. "It's been tough." "I can't even imagine what you're going through," Karen said. I wanted to check in on you. And I wanted to talk about Grace." "Of course. Grace. My daughter. The child I hadn't known about for nearly a decade, now recovering from a life-saving liver transplant that I had been the donor for." "How's she doing?" I asked. "She's doing much better," Karen replied, relief evident in her voice. "The doctors say she's recovering well, thanks to you." "That's good," I said, feeling a strange mix of pride and guilt. I had done the right thing by helping Grace, but I still felt like I had failed her by not being there from the beginning. "Matt," Karen continued, "I know this is a lot, and I don't want to overwhelm you, but Grace has been asking about you. She wants to meet you." I felt my heart tighten. I had always known this moment would come, but now that it was here, I wasn't sure I was ready. "I don't know if now is the best time," I said hesitantly. "Things have been complicated." "I understand," Karen said softly, "but she's your daughter, Matt, and she's been through so much. It would mean the world to her to meet you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I couldn't keep avoiding this forever. "Okay," I said finally, "let's set something up. I'll meet her." We made plans for me to visit Karen and Grace the following week. After hanging up the phone, I sat in silence for a long time, grappling with the reality of my situation. I was about to meet my daughter for the first time, while still trying to process the loss of my wife. Life had a way of throwing curveballs I never saw coming. The day of the meeting, I drove to Karen's house, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I hadn't seen Karen in years, and I had never met Grace. What would she think of me? What would I think of her? Would we be able to form a bond, or would it be too late? When I arrived at Karen's house, she greeted me at the door with a warm smile, though there was an air of nervousness about her. "Thanks for coming," she said softly, ushering me inside. The house was cozy, filled with family photos and mementos of a life I hadn't been a part of. Karen led me to the living room, where Grace was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Grace," Karen said gently, "this is Matt." I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at her. Grace was small for her age, likely due to the health problems she had faced, but she had a spark in her eyes that reminded me so much of Karen, and to my surprise, I could see a bit of myself in her too. "Hi," I said awkwardly, not sure how to begin. "Hi," Grace replied, her voice soft but confident. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence before Grace spoke again. "Mom says you're my dad." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle over me. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I am." Grace studied me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, she smiled. "I'm glad you came," she said. "I've been waiting to meet you." I couldn't help but smile back, even though I still felt a little out of my depth. "I'm glad I came too," I said honestly. For the next hour we talked. It was a little awkward at first, but as the conversation flowed, I began to relax. Grace was smart, funny, and full of questions about me, my job, and her siblings. I told her about Lily, Ava, and Noah, and she seemed excited at the idea of having brothers and sisters. When it was time for me to leave, Grace gave me a hug, and it nearly broke my heart. I hadn't known her for long, but I already felt a strong connection to her. I promised I would visit again soon, and I meant it. On the drive home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was glad I had met Grace, but I couldn't help but feel guilty about the timing. My life was in chaos, and I wasn't sure I could be the father she needed right now, but I knew I had to try. The following months were a whirlwind. I juggled work, raising my kids, and getting to know Grace. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to find a balance. My sister, Lauren, was a lifesaver, helping with the kids and giving me the space I needed to figure things out. As for Grace, she fit into our family better than I had expected. Lily and Ava adored her, and even little Noah seemed to sense that she was part of our family. We spent more and more time together, and before long, Grace was spending weekends at our house, bonding with her siblings. But even as things seemed to be falling into place, I couldn't shake the lingering feelings of guilt and loss. I still hadn't fully processed Emily's death, and the knowledge of her affair with Zach continued to weigh on me. I tried not to think about it too much, but there were nights when the weight of it all felt crushing. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the photos on the mantel. There was a picture of Emily and me on our wedding day, both of us smiling, full of hope for the future. It felt like a lifetime ago. Lauren walked in, noticing the look on my face. She sat down beside me, her expression soft with understanding. "You okay?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. Some days I feel like I'm getting through it, but other days I don't know how I'm supposed to keep going." Lauren nodded, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's going to take time, Matt. You lost your wife, and you found out some things that were hard. But you've got the kids, and you've got Grace now. You're doing the best you can." I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. I just keep thinking about what I could have done differently. Maybe if I had been a better husband, things wouldn't have turned out this way. "Don't do that to yourself," Lauren said firmly. "Emily made her own choices. You can't carry the blame for that. All you can do now is focus on your future and the kids." She was right, of course. I knew she was. But letting go of the guilt wasn't as easy as just telling myself to move on. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to put one foot in front of the other. I spent as much time with the kids as I could, trying to give them the stability they needed after losing their mom. Grace became a regular part of our lives, and I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. One day, as we were all sitting around the dinner table, Lily looked up at me with a serious expression on her face. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" she asked. I smiled at her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be okay." It wasn't an easy road, but we were finding our way. One day at a time, life was slowly settling into a new normal for us. I had to learn how to juggle my responsibilities as a single parent, an electrician, and now a father to a child I had just met, Grace. It wasn't easy, but I could feel a rhythm slowly falling into place. The mornings were chaotic as always, with Lily and Ava rushing to get ready for school, and Noah causing a ruckus in his high chair, demanding attention. Grace would spend her weekends with us, and those times felt the most natural. It was as though she had always been part of our family, and the bond between her and the other kids grew stronger with each visit. Grace had integrated into our lives seamlessly, and watching her laugh and play with her siblings was one of the few things that kept me going on the toughest days. Lily and Ava adored her, treating her as the cool older sister they never had. Even Noah, despite his age, seemed to sense that Grace was important to our family. I had to admit, I felt a strange sense of relief. Relief that despite all the emotional chaos surrounding Emily's death and her affair, Grace was the one thing that made everything feel like it would be okay. But, as anyone could tell you, moving forward wasn't as easy as just getting over it. No matter how well things seemed to be going on the outside, I still wrestled with the nagging thoughts about the past, Emily's betrayal, her untimely death, and how Zach fit into the whole mess. There were so many unanswered questions, questions I couldn't get rid of. I found myself awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying old arguments, conversations, and fleeting moments from our marriage. Could I have prevented it all? Would things have been different if I had paid more attention? These thoughts gnawed at me. One weekend, after the kids had gone to bed, Grace and I sat in the living room. She was curled up on the couch, flipping through one of her favorite comic books, while I pretended to watch a football game on TV. The truth was, my mind wasn't on the game at all. I was thinking about Emily again. I couldn't stop myself from replaying the last few months of our marriage, those late nights when she would come home from her business trips, acting distant and preoccupied. At the time, I'd chalked it up to the pressures of her job, but now it seemed so obvious. She had been distracted because of Zach. "Hey, Dad," Grace said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a hesitation in it that made me sit up straighter. "What's up, kiddo?" I asked, turning off the TV and giving her my full attention. "I've been thinking," she began, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of the comic book in her lap, about us. "You and me." My heart skipped a beat, and I felt that familiar tension creeping into my chest. I'd been waiting for this conversation ever since I met her. It was only a matter of time before she would want answers, and I wasn't sure I was ready to give them. "What about us?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady. Grace looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for something. "I've been thinking about how we didn't know each other for so long. I mean, you didn't even know about me until a few months ago, right?" I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. "That's right." I didn't know Grace. I wish I had, but I didn't. She sighed, shifting her position on the couch. "It's weird, you know? I feel like I've missed out on having a dad, and you missed out on me." I felt a lump forming in my throat, but I swallowed it down. "I know. I've thought about that a lot too. I'm sorry, Grace. I really am." "If I had known." She shook her head, cutting me off. "I'm not blaming you. I guess I'm trying to figure out what happens now. I mean, you're my dad, but you weren't there for the first part of my life. So, what does that mean for us?" I could hear the hurt in her voice, and it broke my heart. She wasn't angry, at least, not in the way I expected. She was just confused, trying to make sense of a situation that neither of us had any control over. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "I've been trying to figure that out too. But I do know that I want to be here for you now. For everything. I want to make up for the time we lost, even though I know I can't get it back." Grace smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I guess we'll just have to take it one day at a time." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was one we needed to have. I knew this was just the beginning. There would be more questions, more tough conversations, but I was ready for them. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some clarity. The following week, I decided to talk to Lauren about my struggles. I had been keeping a lot of my feelings to myself, not wanting to burden anyone, but I realized that I couldn't go through this alone anymore. One evening, after the kids were in bed, Lauren and I sat down at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee. "I've been thinking about a lot of things," I began, stirring my coffee absently. "About Emily, about Grace, about how everything's just complicated." Lauren nodded, her expression sympathetic. "I figured as much. You've been carrying a lot on your shoulders, Matt." "I just can't stop thinking about Emily," I admitted, my voice low. "About the affair, about what I could have done differently. I keep wondering if I could have prevented all of this somehow." Lauren reached across the table and placed a hand on mine. "You can't keep blaming yourself. Emily made her choices, and while it's natural to wonder what could have been, you have to remember that you weren't the one who did this." "She was." "I know that," I said, though it didn't ease the guilt gnawing at me. "But I can't help thinking. What if I had been a better husband? What if I had paid more attention? Would she still be alive?" Lauren sighed. "Matt, you're torturing yourself with what-ifs. There's no way to know if things would have been different. You can't go back and change the past. All you can do is focus on the future and your kids. They need you." I nodded, knowing she was right. I had to stop living in the past, but it was easier said than done. As time went on, I began to focus more on my relationship with Grace. She was spending more weekends with us, and the more time we spent together, the closer we became. I started taking her out for one-on-one activities, going to the movies, grabbing ice cream, or just walking around the park. It was important to me that she knew I wanted to be part of her life, not just as a parent, but as someone she could trust and talk to. One day, during one of our weekend outings, Grace asked me a question that caught me off guard. Do you think I'll ever meet my siblings? She asked, her voice tentative. I blinked, not sure how to respond. What do you mean? She looked down at her shoes, kicking a pebble across the sidewalk. I mean, I know I have brothers and sisters now, Lily, Eva, and Noah, but what about my other siblings? The ones from my mom's side. It took me a moment to process what she was asking. Grace had grown up with Karen and her husband, Eric, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that Eric might have children from his previous marriage. I'm not sure, I said honestly. I don't really know much about your mom's side of the family. Have you asked her about it? Grace nodded, yeah, but she doesn't talk about it much. I think it makes her sad. I wonder if they would want to know me. Her words tugged at my heart, and I realized just how much Grace was grappling with, trying to find her place in a family that she hadn't been part of for so long. I'm sure they would, I said, trying to reassure her, and if that's something you want to explore, I'll support you. We'll figure it out together. Grace smiled, though there was still a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. I knew this was something that would take time, but I was determined to help her navigate it, just as I was trying to navigate my own complicated feelings. As the months went by, our little family continued to grow closer. Lily and Ava adored Grace, and Noah, now getting older, had started to follow her around like a little shadow. It was heartwarming to see how naturally Grace fit into our lives, even though she had only been with us for a short time. But despite the growing sense of normalcy, there were still moments when I felt the weight of everything I had been through. Emily's death, her affair with Zach, the sudden appearance of Grace in my life. It was a lot to process. Some days I felt like I was just going through the motions, trying to hold everything together for the sake of the kids. One evening, as I was tucking the kids into bed, Lily asked me a question that caught me off guard. Daddy, do you think Mommy is watching over us? She asked, her big brown eyes looking up at me expectantly. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer. I think she is, sweetheart. I think she's always watching over us, and she loves you very much. Lily seemed satisfied with my answer, but her question lingered with me long after I left her room. It reminded me of all the unresolved feelings I still had about Emily. I knew I needed to let go, but it was hard. She had been my wife, the mother of my children, and despite everything, I had loved her. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that I needed to find a way to move on, not just for my sake, but for the kids. They deserved a father who wasn't stuck in the past, a father who could be fully present for them. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to stop dwelling on what had happened with Emily. I couldn't change the past, but I could focus on the future. I could be the best father I could be to my kids, and I could build a relationship with Grace that would last. And so, little by little, I began to let go. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the weight of it all threatened to pull me under. But with each passing day, I found myself looking forward more and back less. As the seasons changed and the kids grew older, our family continued to thrive. Grace became a permanent fixture in our lives, and the bond between her and her siblings only deepened. We celebrated birthdays, holidays, and all the little moments in between, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, life never is, but it was enough. And in the end, that's all any of us can really ask for. Life has a way of moving forward, even when it feels like time should stand still. As the years went by, my family began to heal in ways I hadn't expected. Grace had become an essential part of our lives, and watching her grow alongside Lily, Eva, and Noah brought me an unexpected sense of fulfillment. The kids were thriving, and despite the chaos that had followed Emily's death, there was peace in our home. But it wasn't always easy. Single parenthood was never something I had prepared for. Balancing work, raising 3 young kids, and getting to know Grace had stretched me thin. There were days when I questioned whether I could keep it all together. My sister Lauren continued to help out, and I owed her more than I could ever repay. But even with her support, there were moments when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. One evening, I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills in front of me. Work had been steady, but with 4 kids to care for, the financial pressure was constant. My electrician's salary was enough to keep us afloat, but just barely. Lauren came in, her hands full of laundry, And she took one look at my face before setting the "You okay, Matt?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I rubbed my temples and sighed. Yeah, I'm fine. Just trying to figure out how to make this all work. Lauren sat down across from me, her expression softening. You're doing great, you know that, right? I've been here, and I see how hard you're working. The kids are happy and healthy, that's what matters most. I know, I said, though my voice was strained. It's a lot sometimes. I feel like I'm always one step away from everything falling apart. Lauren reached out and placed her hand on mine. You're not alone in this. I'm here, and you've got your friends too. Don't be afraid to lean on us when you need to. I nodded, grateful for her words. But I still felt the burden weighing heavily on my shoulders. It wasn't just the bills or the day-to-day challenges. It was the emotional toll of everything that had happened. Even though I had tried to move on from Emily's death and her affair with Zach, there were still moments when the past crept up on me, leaving me with a gnawing sense of guilt and loss. That night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself sitting on the couch, flipping through old photo albums. There were pictures of Emily and me from when we were first married, back when life seemed simpler, and we had our whole future ahead of us. I traced my finger over her smiling face, feeling a pang in my chest. You left me with so many questions, I whispered to the photo. I wish I understood why. I closed the album and set it aside, determined not to let my mind dwell on the past any longer. I had a family to take care of, and they needed me to be present, not lost in memories. The next morning, I woke up early and started getting the kids ready for school. Grace had been spending more time with us, and it was becoming more common for her to stay over during the week, not just on weekends. It warmed my heart to see how close she had grown to Lily and Ava. The three of them were inseparable, always laughing, playing games, and sharing secrets. Noah, still the baby of the family, adored his sisters and followed them everywhere, his chubby little legs trying to keep up. As I was packing lunches, Grace came into the kitchen, still half asleep but smiling. Morning, Dad, she said, her voice groggy but cheerful. Morning, Grace, I replied, handing her a juice box. You sleep okay? Yeah, she said, stifling a yawn. I had a weird dream, though. Oh yeah? What about? She sat down at the table, sipping her juice. I dreamed we were all on a boat and it was raining really hard, but instead of trying to get out of the rain, we were all laughing and splashing in the water. It was weird, but it felt nice, you know. I chuckled. Sounds like an adventure. Grace smiled, but then her expression turned thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot about Mom lately, she said quietly, looking down at her juice box. My heart tightened at her words. I hadn't talked much about Karen since Grace had become a part of our lives, but I knew the subject of her mother was always in the back of her mind. I figured you might be, I said gently, sitting down beside her. Do you want to talk about it? Grace shrugged, picking at the edge of the table. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I don't remember her as well as I should. She's still around, but we don't talk like we used to. It's like I'm scared of losing her, even though she's still here. I reached out and squeezed her hand. I get it, Grace. It's hard when things change, but your mom loves you, and just because you're spending more time with us doesn't mean you're losing her. She'll always be a part of your life. Grace nodded, though her expression remained somber. I just wish everything could go back to how it was before. Her words hit me hard, and I felt a surge of empathy. I'd spent so much time trying to move on from the past, but Grace was still struggling to find her place between two families. It wasn't fair to her, and I hated that she had to deal with so much at such a young age. I know it's tough, I said softly, but you're doing great, Grace, and no matter what happens, we're always going to be here for you. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thanks, Dad. Hearing her call me Dad still made my heart swell. It was a reminder of how far we had come, and how much we had both grown. Grace wasn't just a part of my life now, she was my daughter, and I was determined to be the father she deserved. As the weeks passed, things began to feel more stable. The kids were doing well in school, and my relationship with Grace continued to deepen. We started doing more activities as a family, weekend trips to the park, movie nights, and even the occasional road trip. It wasn't always perfect, but it was enough. One evening, as we were all sitting around the dinner table, Ava suddenly blurted out a question that took me by surprise. "Daddy, are we ever going to have a mommy again?" she asked, her innocent eyes wide with curiosity. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Lily looked at Ava in surprise, while Noah continued to play with his food, oblivious to the sudden tension. I took a deep breath, not sure how to respond. I had been so focused on raising the kids and dealing with my own emotions that I hadn't really thought about the possibility of finding someone new. It wasn't that I didn't want companionship, but the idea of dating again seemed overwhelming, especially with everything else on my plate. "I don't know, Ava," I said finally, my voice gentle. "Right now, my job is to take care of you guys. But maybe one day we'll see." Ava seemed satisfied with my answer, but the question lingered in my mind long after dinner was over. Was it time to start thinking about moving on in that way? Could I even consider opening myself up to someone new after everything that had happened with Emily? The thought of dating again felt strange, almost foreign. I'd spent so many years focused on my family, trying to rebuild after Emily's death, that the idea of letting someone else into our lives seemed impossible. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe it was time to at least consider it. I didn't rush into anything. Instead, I spent the next few months focusing on my family, continuing to build the strong foundation we had established. But the thought of companionship stayed in the back of my mind, quietly waiting for the right moment. One afternoon, as I was picking the kids up from school, I ran into an old friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. Her name was Rachel, and we had gone to high school together. She had moved away after graduation, but it turned out she was back in town, working as a teacher at the local elementary school. "Matt Connors? Is that you?" she asked, her face lighting up with recognition. I turned, surprised to see her standing there. "Rachel? Wow, it's been forever." We stood there for a moment, both of us smiling awkwardly as we tried to catch up on lost time. "It really has," Rachel said, laughing. "What have you been up to all these years?" I shrugged, glancing over at the kids as they ran toward the car. "Just raising kids, working as an electrician. Life's been busy." Rachel nodded, her expression softening. "I heard about Emily. I'm so sorry, Matt." I felt a familiar pang in my chest at the mention of Emily's name, but I forced a smile. "Thanks. It's been tough, but we're getting through it." Rachel looked at me for a moment, her eyes filled with a kind of understanding that made me feel strangely comforted. "You've always been a strong guy. I'm sure you're doing an amazing job." We chatted for a few more minutes before saying our goodbyes, but as I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. There had been something about the way Rachel looked at me, something that stirred feelings I hadn't acknowledged in a long time. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Rachel more and more. We had exchanged phone numbers after our brief encounter, and we started texting occasionally, catching up on life and sharing stories about our kids. It was nice to talk to someone who understood the challenges of parenthood, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations. One evening, after the kids were in bed, I received a text from Rachel that made my heart race a little. "Hey, I know this is kind of random, but would you want to grab a coffee sometime just to catch up properly?" I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety. Was I ready for this? Was it too soon? But as I thought about it, I realized that there was no harm in meeting up for coffee. It wasn't a date, it was just two old friends catching up. I texted back, agreeing to meet her that weekend. The morning of our coffee meetup, I felt a nervous energy that I hadn't felt in years. I dressed casually, but I couldn't help but feel like I was overthinking everything. Was this a mistake? What if things got awkward? What if? Before I could spiral any further, I arrived at the cafe and spotted Rachel sitting at a table near the window. She smiled and waved as I walked in, and suddenly, all my nerves disappeared. "Hey," she said brightly as I sat down. "I'm so glad you came." "Yeah, me too," I said, feeling a bit more relaxed. We spent the next hour talking and laughing, reminiscing about old times and catching up on everything we had missed in each other's lives. Rachel was easy to talk to, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could just be myself without worrying about all the baggage I had been carrying. As we finished our coffee, Rachel looked at me with a smile. "You know, it's really nice seeing you again, Matt. I didn't realize how much I missed having you around." I felt a warmth spread through my chest at her words. "Yeah, I missed you too." For the first time since Emily's death, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of moving on, of maybe, just maybe, finding happiness again. Over the next few months, Rachel and I continued to meet up, sometimes with the kids, sometimes just the two of us. It wasn't anything serious at first, just two friends reconnecting, but as time went on, it became clear that there was something more between us. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted a little longer than necessary, but it was there. One evening, after a particularly fun day at the park with the kids, Rachel and I found ourselves sitting on a bench, watching the sunset. "Matt," she said softly, her voice hesitant, "I know we've been spending a lot of time together, and I really enjoy it, but I need to know, what are we doing here?" I turned to look at her, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking down at her hands. I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for, but I also don't want to keep pretending like there's nothing between us. I care about you, Matt, and I think you care about me too." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I wasn't sure what to say, but then I realized that she was right. I did care about her, more than I had been willing to admit to myself. "I do care about you, Rachel," I said quietly, "and I think, maybe it's time to stop pretending. I'm ready." Rachel smiled, her eyes lighting up with relief. "I'm glad to hear that," and just like that, things between us changed. We started dating, taking things slow at first, but it felt right. The kids adored her, and she fit into our family so naturally that it was as if she had always been there. As time went on, I found myself falling for Rachel in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the same as it had been with Emily, it was different, but in a good way. Rachel understood me in a way that no one else could, and she brought a sense of joy and lightness into my life that I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch after the kids had gone to bed, Rachel turned to me with a smile. "You know," she said softly, "I think we're going to be okay." I looked at her, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. "Yeah," I said, taking her hand in mine, "I think we are." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. As the months went by, my relationship with Rachel continued to deepen. What had started as a simple friendship had blossomed into something more profound, something I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the physical chemistry or the fun we had together, it was the ease with which she fit into my life, into our family. Rachel was kind, compassionate, and she had a way of making the weight I had carried for so long feel lighter. But even as things seemed to be going well between us, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that sometimes crept in. It had been years since Emily had died, but there were still moments when I felt like I was betraying her memory by moving on, by letting someone new into my life. I knew it was irrational. Emily was gone, and I deserved to find happiness again. But those feelings of guilt weren't always something I could control.